Zektar sat alone in his small room on the great warship Crimson Talon. The metal walls around him were cold and smooth, painted in the dark red color that marked all Vorthic military vessels. Outside his single window, stars moved slowly past as the ship traveled through space. He had seen millions of those stars in his long life as a warrior, but tonight they reminded him of something he wished he could forget. His hands shook as he reached for the memory crystal on his desk. The small blue device would record his thoughts and experiences, storing them for the military archives. Every Vorthic soldier was required to document important battles for future generations to study. But this memory was different. This one would serve as a warning. 3 cycles had passed since the disaster at Luna Base 7. 3 cycles since the Vorthic Empire learned that not all prey fought the same way. 3 cycles since they discovered that some species were not meant to be conquered. Zektar activated the crystal and began to speak in his native tongue, his voice rough and tired. The crystal would translate his words for whoever might listen later. I am Zektar of the 3rd Assault Division, survivor of the Luna Base 7 campaign. What I am about to record happened exactly as I described it. I swear this by the honor of my ancestors and the strength of my clan. He paused and looked down at his hands. They were large and powerful, covered in the natural armor plating that made his species such feared warriors. But these same hands had trembled with fear when facing creatures half his size. The memory of that shame burned in his chest. The humans call their home world Earth. It orbits a yellow star in what we designated as Sector 7G. When our scouts first found it, we thought it was a gift from the void itself. A young world with a single intelligent species that had barely learned to travel between planets. Their technology seemed primitive. Their weapons were crude. Their military forces were small and scattered. Zektar stood up and walked to his window. In the distance, he could see other Vorthic ships moving in formation. Once, the sight had filled him with pride. Now it only reminded him of how many ships they had lost. Admiral Krext H called the attack on Earth a training exercise. He said our young warriors needed practice against live targets before facing real enemies. The humans were supposed to be nothing more than target practice. We were so confident that we broadcast our invasion plans across military channels, laughing about how easy it would be. The memory of that laughter made Zektar feel sick. They had been so arrogant, so sure of their superiority. The Vorthic Empire had conquered 17 different worlds without losing a single major battle. Their plasma weapons could cut through any known armor. Their warriors stood 3 meters tall and weighed twice as much as most other species. Their tactics had been perfected over thousands of years of warfare. I remember the day we received our orders. I was in the armory, checking my equipment with my squad mates. Draxol was polishing his plasma rifle and joking about how many humans he would kill before lunch. Vorthic was betting that the entire war would be over in less than 1 rotation of their planet. Zektar touched one of the long scars that ran across his chest armor. The human weapon that had made that mark should not have been able to penetrate Vorthic defenses. But somehow it had cut right through, missing his heart by mere centimeters. The intelligence reports made it seem impossible that we could lose. The humans used projectile weapons that fired small metal bullets. They had vehicles that moved on wheels instead of hovering above the ground. Their soldiers wore soft armor, made of cloth and metal plates. Everything about them seemed backward and primitive. He returned to his chair and activated a holographic display. Images of human soldiers appeared in the air before him, taken from surveillance during the early phases of the invasion. They looked so small and fragile compared to Vorthic warriors. Their skin was soft and pink, without any natural armor. Their weapons looked like toys. What we did not understand was that these humans had been fighting wars for their entire history. While other species developed technology or art or philosophy, humans perfected the art of killing. They had fought against their own kind for thousands of years, learning lessons that no other species had ever needed to learn. Zektar zoomed in on one particular image. It showed a human soldier named Jake Morrison, who would later become the commander of Luna Base 7's defenses. In the picture, Morrison was smiling. At the time, Zektar had thought it was the smile of someone who did not understand the danger he faced. Now he knew better. It was the smile of a predator who saw prey walking into his trap. Morrison was 43 years old, according to our files. He had fought in 6 different human conflicts before we arrived. The scars on his face told stories of battles against his own kind. His eyes were the color of winter ice, cold and calculating. When I first saw him, I thought he looked weak. I could have broken him in half with my bare hands. The image shifted to show Morrison's military record. Page after page of commendations, battle reports, and tactical innovations scrolled past. Even translated into Vorthic language, the achievements were impressive. But what stood out most were the words his. Fellow humans used to describe him: relentless, innovative, fearless. The attack on Luna Base 7 was supposed to be a simple operation. Our ships would destroy their orbital defenses, then our ground forces would eliminate any survivors. The base itself was built inside an old mining complex on their moon. It should have been easy to crack open like an egg. Zektar's voice grew quieter as he continued. The next part of the story was the hardest to tell, because it was where everything began to go wrong. When our dropships approached the lunar surface, the humans did exactly what we expected them to do. They retreated deeper into the base, abandoning their outer defensive positions. Our scanners showed them falling back in disorder, leaving behind equipment and supplies. Admiral Krext announced over the fleet channel that the victory was already ours. But even as he spoke those words, Zektar remembered the uneasy feeling that had settled in his stomach during that approach. Something about the human retreat had felt wrong, though he could not identify what bothered him at the time. I was part of the first wave of ground troops. 50 Vorthic warriors in full battle armor, armed with the finest weapons our technology could produce. We landed near the main entrance to the mining complex and began our advance. The human defenses seemed weak and poorly organized. They had small groups of soldiers firing at us from behind improvised barriers, but they always retreated when we returned fire. The memory crystal hummed softly as it recorded his words. Zektar could see his reflection in its smooth surface, and he noticed how much older he looked now. The battle at Luna Base 7 had aged him more than decades of previous warfare. What we did not realize was that every step we took deeper into that base was planned. Every retreat was calculated. Every abandoned position was a trap waiting to be sprung. The humans were not running from us in fear. They were leading us exactly where they wanted us to go. Zektar closed his eyes and let the memory wash over him. He could still smell the recycled air of the lunar base, still hear the echo of Vorthic boots on metal floors. Most clearly of all, he could remember the moment when Jake Morrison's voice came over their communication system, speaking in perfect Vorthic language. "Welcome to Luna Base 7, gentlemen. I hope you brought your appetite, because we have prepared quite a feast for you." The recording crystal pulsed with stored data as Zektar fell silent. Outside his window, the stars continued their ancient dance, unchanged by the horrors that had unfolded among them. But for Zektar, those stars would forever remind him of the day the Vorthic Empire learned that some prey had claws. Zektar reached for a cup of warm liquid that sat beside his recording crystal. His throat felt dry as he prepared to continue his story. The second part was harder to tell, because it was when he first began to understand that something was terribly wrong. The initial assault went exactly as our tactical computers predicted it would. We landed on the lunar surface at 0800 hours, ship time. The human outer defenses crumbled within minutes of our arrival. Their soldiers fired a few shots at our dropships, then retreated into the mining tunnels like frightened animals. He paused and took a sip from his cup. The liquid was bitter, but it helped calm his nerves. Draxol was the first to voice what we were all thinking. He said the humans were even weaker than our intelligence reports suggested. Vorthik laughed and said we would be back on the ship in time for the evening meal. Even I began to think that Admiral Krexith had been right about this being nothing more than a training exercise. Zektar activated his holographic display again. This time it showed a three-dimensional map of Luna Base 7 as it had appeared before the battle. The complex was built into a series of natural and artificial caves that stretched deep into the moon's surface. Multiple levels connected by narrow tunnels and larger chambers that had once housed mining equipment. The base looked like a maze from above, but our sensors could track every tunnel and room. We had complete maps of the facility uploaded to our armor systems. The humans had nowhere to hide and no way to escape. Our plan was simple. Enter through the main entrance, sweep each level systematically, and eliminate all resistance. The map zoomed in to show the route that Zektar's squad had taken during their advance. Red dots marked the positions where they had encountered human defenders. At first glance, it looked like a standard military operation. But Zektar now knew that every one of those encounters had been carefully planned. Commander Jake Morrison was waiting for us at the first checkpoint inside the base. He stood behind a metal barrier with 5 other human soldiers, all of them pointing their primitive weapons in our direction. When he saw us approaching, he did something that confused every warrior in my squad. Zektar's voice grew quieter. As he remembered that moment, he smiled. Not the frightened grin of someone trying to be brave before death. Not the desperate expression of a cornered animal. Morrison smiled like someone who was genuinely happy to see us. His blue eyes showed no fear at all. If anything, he looked excited. The memory still puzzled Zektar. In all his years of warfare, he had never seen an enemy react that way to overwhelming odds. Fear, anger, desperation, resignation. These were normal responses. But excitement? That was something new and disturbing. Morrison spoke to us in our own language. His pronunciation was perfect, as if he had been speaking Vorthik his entire life. He said, "You boys are right on time. We have been waiting for you to arrive. Welcome to our little home away from home." Zektar stood up and walked to his window again. Even now, 3 cycles later, those words sent cold feelings through his body. We opened fire immediately. 50 plasma rifles discharged at once, filling the tunnel with enough energy to melt through a starship hull. The air itself seemed to catch fire as our weapons unleashed their fury. When the light faded and the smoke cleared, we expected to see nothing but burned metal and ash. He turned back to the recording crystal, his face showing the same confusion he had felt on that day. The barrier was gone. The metal had been completely vaporized by our weapons. But there were no bodies, no blood, no sign that anyone had ever been there. Morrison and his soldiers had simply vanished like ghosts in the night. The holographic display shifted to show the tunnel system in more detail. Zektar pointed to a series of smaller passages that branched off from the main corridor. We did not understand then how humans could move so quickly through such narrow spaces. Our armor made us strong and nearly invulnerable, but it also made us slow and clumsy in tight places. The humans were smaller and more flexible. They could crawl through maintenance shafts and ventilation systems that we could not even see. Zektar's squad had advanced deeper into the base, following their predetermined route. The next chamber was larger, filled with old mining equipment and storage containers. Their sensors showed multiple human heat signatures scattered throughout. The room hiding behind cover. This time, we were ready for their tricks. We spread out and approached from multiple angles, making it impossible for them to escape through hidden passages. Vorthik took point while I covered the left flank. Draxol and 2 others moved to secure the right side of the chamber. The tactical display showed the positions of each Vorthik warrior as they entered the room. Their formation was textbook perfect, covering all possible escape routes and providing overlapping fields of fire. The humans opened fire first. Their bullets bounced harmlessly off our armor, creating tiny sparks but causing no damage. We returned fire with our plasma weapons, and this time we saw them fall. 3 human soldiers were hit directly and did not get back up. 2 others retreated behind heavier cover, calling out warnings to their companions. For a moment, Zektar had felt relief. Finally, the battle was proceeding as it should. The humans were dying, and his squad was unharmed. But that feeling did not last long. Then we heard Morrison's voice again, coming from hidden speakers throughout the chamber. He was laughing, actually laughing as his own soldiers died around him. He said, "Nice shooting, boys. You got 3 of our decoys. Hope you enjoyed the show, because now it is our turn." The word decoys had not translated properly into Vorthik at first. Zektar's armor computer had to search its database before explaining that it meant false targets designed to fool an enemy. But that made no sense. Why would soldiers sacrifice themselves as decoys? That was when we learned our first lesson about human warfare. They do not just accept death as a possibility. They plan for it. They use it as a weapon. Those 3 soldiers had volunteered to die in order to reveal our positions and tactics to their hidden observers. Zektar sat back down, his large frame making the chair creak under his weight. The real attack came from above and below simultaneously. Humans dropped from concealed positions in the ceiling, while others emerged from tunnels beneath the floor. They were everywhere at once, moving with a speed and coordination that should have been impossible for such a primitive species. The holographic display showed the chaos that followed. Red indicators marked the positions of human soldiers as they swarmed around the Vorthik warriors like angry insects. Private Lisa Chun was the first human I saw up close during actual combat. She was small even by human standards, probably weighing less than half what I did. Her armor looked like it was made from scraps of metal held together with tape and wire. Her weapon was an ancient projectile rifle that should have been in a museum. But despite her primitive equipment, Chun moved like a seasoned warrior. She rolled between cover positions with fluid grace, firing short bursts that forced the Vorthik soldiers to keep their heads down. Most importantly, she seemed to know exactly where each alien warrior was positioned at all times. Chun threw something at Draxol that we later learned was called a grenade. It was a simple explosive device, nothing compared to our advanced weapons. But when it exploded, it did something our computers had not predicted. It filled the air with tiny metal fragments that found the weak joints in our armor. Draxol had been wounded, the first Vorthik casualty of the war. His armor was breached in 3 places, and green blood was flowing from cuts on his arms and legs. The sight of Vorthik blood had stunned the entire squad into momentary silence. While we stared at our wounded comrade, the humans struck again. This time it was Sergeant Bobby Martinez leading a group of 4 soldiers in a direct assault on our position. They moved in perfect coordination, covering each other as they advanced. Martinez himself carried 2 weapons and seemed to fire them independently with either hand. The most disturbing thing about Martinez was not his skill with weapons, but his attitude. Like Morrison, he seemed to be enjoying himself. He called out challenges to the Vorthik warriors, inviting them to single combat. When Vorthik accepted and charged forward, Martinez simply smiled and pulled the pins from 2 grenades. Vorthik survived the explosion, but barely. His armor was cracked, and his primary weapon was destroyed. Martinez had used his own grenades as close-range weapons, accepting the damage to himself in order to disable a larger enemy. No sane warrior would make such a trade. But Martinez was not alone in his willingness to accept injury for tactical advantage. Throughout the chamber, human soldiers were making similar sacrifices. They exposed themselves to enemy fire in order to spot weaknesses. They charged into hopeless situations to create distractions. They fought like beings who had nothing left to lose. Captain Diana Walsh coordinated the entire attack from a position we never located. Her voice came through the speakers, calm and professional, as she directed her soldiers with surgical precision. She seemed to know our tactics better than we did, anticipating our moves before we made them. Walsh's commands were brief and efficient. She told Chun to target the joints in Vorthik armor. She directed Martinez to use the mining equipment as improvised weapons. Zektar paused his recording and stood up to check the door to his quarters. He wanted to make sure no one could hear what he was about to say. The next part of his story contained truths that most Vorthik warriors refuse to believe, even now. Level 2 of Luna Base 7 was where we learned that humans do not fight like any other species in the galaxy. They do not simply defend or attack. They transform the battlefield itself into a weapon. He returned to his chair and activated a new section of his holographic display. This showed the second level of the mining complex, a series of interconnected chambers that had once housed heavy machinery and ore processing equipment. My squad had been reinforced by warriors from the 3rd and 5th Assault Groups. We now had over 100 Vorthik soldiers advancing through the facility. Admiral Krext himself was monitoring our progress from orbit, expecting us to finish the operation within the next few hours. The display showed the positions of Vorthik forces as they moved deeper into the base. Their formation looked impressive and professional. Each squad covered specific sectors, with overlapping fields of fire and multiple fallback positions planned. It was the kind of textbook military advance that had conquered 17 worlds. The first sign that something was wrong came when we reached the main processing chamber. Our sensors detected no human life signs anywhere on the level. The chamber was completely empty, except for old mining equipment and storage containers. It should have been a relief, but somehow it felt like walking into a tomb. Zektar had been with the advance team that entered the chamber first. The space was enormous, with a ceiling that stretched up into darkness, and machinery that looked like sleeping metal giants. Everything was quiet except for the sound of their own breathing and the hum of their equipment. Sergeant Bobby Martinez spoke to us from hidden speakers, just as Morrison had done on the previous level. But this time, his voice was different. He was not laughing or making jokes. He sounded like someone giving last words to a dying friend. Martinez had said something that the translation computers struggled to interpret. The phrase was, "Remember." The Alamo, which referred to some ancient human battle that meant nothing to Vorthik warriors. But the tone of his voice suggested it was important. Then Private Lisa Chun came on the communications channel. Her voice was steady and calm as she spoke directly to me. She said, "Zektar of the 3rd Assault Division, you have been selected for a special demonstration. Please step forward to the center of the chamber." The fact that she knew his name and unit designation should have been impossible. Vorthik military communications were encrypted with codes that changed every few minutes. Yet somehow this primitive human had not only intercepted their signals, but decoded them as well. I followed my training and ignored the human's words. But as my squad spread out to secure the chamber, I noticed that Chun had been right about. Something. The center of the room was different from the rest. The floor was made of a different material, and there were unusual markings painted on the metal. Zektar had ordered his warriors to avoid the center area while they swept the chamber. But as they moved around the edges of the room, more human, voices began speaking from the hidden speakers. Each voice addressed a specific Vorthic soldier by name and rank. Corporal Ryan Bell spoke to Draxol, asking about his wounded arm and suggesting that he might want to seek medical attention. Private Andy Garcia asked Vorthic if he was enjoying his first visit to a human world. Captain Jennifer Brooks told our squad leader that his tactical formation had a weakness on the left flank. The personal knowledge that the humans displayed was unsettling, but what happened next was far worse. One by one, Vorthic soldiers began to realize that the humans were not just observing them. They were controlling the environment around them. The lights in the chamber began to flicker and dim. Our armor sensors detected changes in air pressure and temperature that should not have been possible in a sealed facility. Then we heard new sounds coming from the walls themselves, like metal groaning under enormous stress. Zektar had ordered his squad to retreat to the entrance, but when they turned around, they discovered that the doorway they had entered through was no longer there. A solid metal wall now blocked their exit, with no sign of how it had appeared or where the opening had gone. Staff Sergeant Tom Hughes explained what was happening in a voice that sounded almost apologetic. He said that Level 2 had been designed as what humans call a kill box. Every piece of equipment, every wall panel, every section of floor could be controlled remotely by human operators. The chamber had been turned into a giant trap, but not the kind of simple explosive device that Vorthic warriors might expect. This was something far more sophisticated and terrifying. The humans had created an environment where they controlled every variable. The floor beneath our feet began to move. Sections tilted up and down like a puzzle being rearranged by invisible hands. Warriors lost their footing and tumbled into newly created gaps. Others found themselves isolated on small islands of metal while chasms opened around them. But the moving floor was only the beginning. The machinery that filled the chamber came to life, operated by remote control from somewhere else in the facility. Conveyor belts started running at high speed. Mechanical arms swung through the air like giant clubs. Processing equipment began, grinding and crushing operations, creating noise that drowned out all communication. Lieutenant Diana Walsh coordinated the entire operation with the precision of a master artist. She did not simply want to kill us. She wanted to demonstrate that humans could manipulate reality itself to serve their purposes. Every movement of every piece of equipment was calculated to maximum psychological effect. Zektar watched helplessly as his fellow warriors were herded like livestock through the mechanical maze. The humans were not even shooting at them yet. They were simply using the environment to separate the Vorthic forces and place each soldier exactly where they wanted him. Then the real attack began. Humans emerged from hidden passages built into the machinery itself. They had been hiding inside the processing equipment, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Some crawled out of conveyor systems. Others dropped from overhead cranes. A few even climbed up through floor drains. The humans moved through their mechanical maze with the ease of long practice. They knew every hiding place, every secret passage, every control mechanism. They fought like dancers who had rehearsed their steps 1,000 times. Private Andy Garcia engaged Vorthic in single combat while standing on a moving conveyor belt. Garcia ran backward against the belt's motion while firing his weapon, forcing Vorthic to chase him through a series of mechanical obstacles. When Vorthic finally got close enough to strike, Garcia leaped onto a crane hook that lifted him safely out of reach. The humans' movements were not just tactically sound. They were theatrical, designed to humiliate as well as defeat. Garcia had turned a life-or-death battle into a performance that mocked Vorthic military pride. Corporal Ryan Bell demonstrated something even more disturbing. He had somehow learned to operate our own plasma weapons better than we could. When Draxol lost his rifle during the chaos, Bell picked it up and immediately began using it against other Vorthic soldiers. Bell did not just fire the weapon randomly. He adjusted the power settings, modified the targeting system, and even synchronized it with the moving machinery to create devastating crossfire patterns. Within minutes, he was using Vorthic technology more effectively than warriors who had trained with it for decades. But the most frightening human was Captain Jennifer Brooks. She appeared in the center of the chamber, standing calmly on a platform that rose from the floor like an elevator. She carried 2 human rifles and had additional weapons strapped to her back and legs. Brooks did not run or hide like the other humans. She stood in plain sight and challenged any Vorthic warrior to face her in direct combat. When 3 soldiers accepted her challenge, she fought all of them simultaneously without moving from her platform. Brooks used the mechanical arms around her platform like extensions of her own body. She ducked under swinging crane hooks while firing both rifles. She rolled across moving conveyor belts to avoid plasma blasts. She even rode on a robotic arm as it lifted her up to attack from above. The battle lasted for over an hour, but it felt like days. The constant noise, movement, and chaos wore down Vorthic morale more effectively than any conventional weapon. Warriors who had never known fear began to panic as the environment itself turned against them. Finally, Staff Sergeant Tom Hughes offered us a choice. His voice came through the speakers one last time, competing with the noise of the machinery. He said we could surrender and be treated as prisoners of war, or we could continue fighting until every one of us was dead. The offer should have been insulting to Vorthic honor. Warriors of the Empire did not surrender to inferior species. But as Ziktar looked around the chamber, he saw his comrades trapped, wounded, and demoralized. More than half of their force had been eliminated without the humans suffering significant casualties. I made the decision to accept Hughes's offer. As the ranking officer present, I ordered my surviving warriors to lay down their weapons. The machinery stopped moving. Zektar's hands trembled as he reached for the recording crystal again. The 4th part of his story was the hardest to tell because it was when he truly understood what humans were capable of. It was when he learned that everything his species believed about warfare was wrong. After our surrender on level 2, the humans kept us prisoner for 6 rotations. They gave us food, water, and medical care for our wounded. Captain Jennifer Brooks visited us daily to ask questions about Vorthic military tactics and technology. She was always polite and professional, treating us with more respect than we had shown to any of our own prisoners. The holding cells had been comfortable by military standards. Each Vorthic warrior had enough space to lie down and move around. The humans provided entertainment devices and even allowed them to communicate with each other. It was not what any of them had expected from a primitive species. On the 7th rotation, Staff Sergeant Tom Hughes came to speak with me personally. He explained that Admiral Krexith had refused all offers to negotiate for our release. The Admiral had declared us dead and was preparing to launch a full-scale assault on Luna Base 7 with the entire invasion fleet. Hughes had seemed genuinely sad about this development. He told Zektar that the humans had hoped to avoid further bloodshed through prisoner exchanges and diplomatic talks. But if the Vorthic Empire wanted a real war, then humanity was prepared to give them one. Hughes asked me if I wanted to witness what he called Operation Crossroads. He said it would be educational for me to see how humans fought when they were truly threatened. I agreed, though I expected to watch the final destruction of the human defenders. The humans had built an observation deck on level 5 of the facility, protected by thick armor plating and energy shields. From there, Zektar could see the lunar surface through reinforced windows. The view showed the approaching Vorthic fleet in all its terrible glory. 200 warships filled the space above Luna Base 7, battle cruisers, assault carriers, and support vessels spread across the sky like a metal storm cloud. It was the largest military force the Vorthic Empire had ever assembled for a single battle. Nothing could survive such overwhelming firepower. Admiral Krexith had learned from the difficulties on the first 2 levels. This time, there would be no gradual advance through tunnels and chambers. The fleet would simply destroy the entire facility from orbit, vaporizing every human inside along with their Vorthic prisoners. But as the fleet moved into attack formation, something unexpected happened. Colonel Pete Davis spoke to Admiral Krexith over an open communication channel that every ship in the fleet could hear. Davis introduced himself as the commanding officer of Luna Base 7 and offered Krexith one final chance to withdraw. The Admiral's response had been exactly what any Vorthic warrior would expect. He laughed at the human's offer and began countdown procedures for the orbital bombardment. In 60 seconds, every weapon in the fleet would fire simultaneously, turning the lunar surface into molten rock. That was when Colonel Davis said something that I will never forget. He told Admiral Krexith H. that humans had been studying Vorthic military tactics for months before the invasion began. He said that human intelligence agents had infiltrated our communication networks and learned everything about our fleet formations and battle strategies. Davis had gone on to explain that Operation Crossroads was not a desperate last stand. It was a carefully planned demonstration of human military capabilities designed to send a message to the entire Vorthic Empire. At 30 seconds remaining, in the countdown, Major Karen Lopez activated what the humans called their ace in the hole. Every ship in the Vorthic fleet suddenly lost primary power. Engines shut down, weapon systems failed, and communication arrays went dark. 200 warships became floating metal hulks in the space of a few heartbeats. Zektar had watched in stunned silence as the pride of the Vorthic military was reduced to helplessness. Ships that had conquered star systems drifted powerlessly through space, their crews trapped inside dark metal coffins. Colonel Davis explained that human computer specialists had spent weeks infiltrating Vorthic computer networks. They had planted what they called logic bombs in the fleet's central command systems. These were hidden programs that activated simultaneously, causing every ship to shut down at once. But the power shutdown was only the beginning of Operation Crossroads. What happened next demonstrated the true scope of human tactical planning and their willingness to take enormous risks to achieve victory. Major Lopez launched Phase 2 of the operation by activating mining charges that had been placed throughout Luna Base 7 weeks before the Vorthic invasion began. The explosions were carefully calculated to create the maximum psychological impact without actually destroying the facility. The lunar surface erupted in a series of controlled explosions that lit up the sky like artificial stars. To the powerless Vorthic crews watching from their dead ships, it looked like their own orbital bombardment had somehow been turned against them. Then the real surprise began. What we had thought was Luna Base 7 was actually just the outer shell of a much larger facility. The explosions revealed hidden launch bays, weapon platforms, and defensive systems that had been concealed beneath. Fake mining equipment. Zektar had stared in amazement as human military technology emerged from the lunar surface like flowers blooming in fast motion. Missile launchers, plasma cannons, and energy shields appeared where there had been nothing but empty rock moments before. But the most shocking revelation came when Staff Sergeant Tom Hughes pointed to what I had thought was empty space near the lunar horizon. He told me to watch carefully as Major Lopez activated the final phase of their demonstration. The empty space had shimmered like heat waves on a hot day. Then Piece by piece, an entire human battle fleet became visible. Ships that had been hidden by some kind of advanced camouflage technology materialized around the helpless Vorthic vessels. 50. Human warships had been there all along, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal themselves. They had technology that made them completely invisible to Vorthic sensors. Our scouts had detected nothing but empty space where an entire fleet was hiding. The human ships moved with coordination that put Vorthic tactical formations to shame. They surrounded the disabled alien vessels without firing a single shot, demonstrating their complete control of the battlefield. Commander Jake Morrison's voice came over the fleet communication channels one final time. He spoke directly to Admiral Krex, offering him the same choice that had been given to me on Level 2, surrender and be treated as prisoners of war, or face complete destruction. Morrison had explained that the power shutdown was temporary. In exactly 1 hour, Vorthic systems would begin coming back online. But by then, every ship in the fleet would be targeted by multiple human weapons. Any vessel that attempted to restart its engines or charge its weapons would be immediately destroyed. Admiral Krex H tried to maintain his dignity even in defeat. He demanded to know how primitive humans had developed technology superior to the Vorthic Empire. Morrison's answer revealed the most disturbing truth of all. Morrison had told the Admiral that human technology was not actually superior. Most of their equipment was crude and inefficient compared to Vorthic engineering. But humans had something far more valuable than advanced technology. They had the ability to think like their enemies. Morrison explained that human intelligence. Operatives had been studying Vorthic military doctrine for over a year before the invasion began. They had infiltrated our communication networks, stolen our tactical manuals, and even placed agents inside our military academies. The humans had known everything about Vorthic's strategy, weapons, and psychology before the first shot was fired. They had used this knowledge to turn the Empire's own strengths against it, creating traps that exploited every weakness in Vorthic thinking. But the most terrifying revelation came when Morrison described what humans call strategic thinking. He said that Operation Crossroads was not really about defending Luna Base 7. It was about sending a message to every species in the galaxy. The message was simple but devastating. Humanity was not just another primitive world waiting to be conquered. They were a military power that could defeat technologically superior enemies through pure intelligence and determination. As Admiral Krex H ordered the fleet to surrender, I finally understood why Staff Sergeant Hughes had wanted me to witness the battle. It was not just educational. It was a warning about what would happen if the Vorthic Empire continued its war against humanity. Hughes had explained that Luna Base 7 was just one small outpost in human space. If they could do this much damage with a single mining facility, what could they accomplish with their full military might? The human fleet began boarding operations to secure the Vorthic vessels. But before they did, Colonel Davis made one final announcement that chilled my blood. He said that everything we had witnessed was being broadcast across human space as a recruitment tool. Davis had gone on to explain that millions of humans were volunteering for military service after seeing how effectively their forces had defeated the Vorthic invasion. The species that had seemed primitive and divided was uniting against a common enemy. Zektar turned off the holographic display and sat back in his chair. The final part of his story was the hardest to tell because it was still happening. 3 cycles had passed since Luna Base 7, but the war that began there showed no signs of ending. If anything, it was getting worse for the Vorthic Empire with each passing day. The journey back to Vorthic space took 2 months aboard the human transport ship Endurance. During that time, I had many conversations with the human crew members who served as our guards. They were professional and courteous, but they were also gathering intelligence about our home worlds and military capabilities. Captain Susan Blake had commanded the transport vessel with quiet efficiency. She spoke fluent Vorthik and seemed genuinely interested in learning about alien cultures and societies. But Zektar quickly realized that every casual conversation was actually an interrogation session. Blake asked me about Vorthik family structures, economic systems, and political organizations. She wanted to know how our society functioned, what motivated our people, and where our weaknesses might be found. I thought I was just making friendly conversation, but I was actually providing intelligence for future human operations. The other human crew members had been equally skilled at extracting information. They asked about Vorthik food preferences, entertainment choices, and social customs. They studied how alien prisoners interacted with each other and what caused stress or comfort among different species. Lieutenant Gary Stone was particularly interested in our military traditions and warrior culture. He asked detailed questions about Vorthik training methods, promotion systems, and combat psychology. Stone claimed he was writing a research paper about alien military organizations, but I now understand he was mapping our psychological vulnerabilities. During the long voyage, Zektar had also learned disturbing things about human society and their approach to warfare. The crew members spoke casually about previous conflicts, revealing that humanity had been fighting wars continuously for their entire recorded history. Sergeant Emma Rodriguez told me that humans had fought over 10,000 major wars in the past 5,000 years. She explained that conflict was so common in human society that they had developed an entire academic discipline devoted to studying warfare and military strategy. Rodriguez had shown him human military textbooks that analyzed battles from throughout their history. Ancient conflicts fought with swords and spears were studied alongside modern space battles, involving energy weapons and orbital bombardments. Humans learned from every victory and every defeat. The most disturbing revelation came when Chief Petty Officer Carlos Martinez explained human military doctrine to me. He said that humans did not fight just to win individual battles. They fought to completely eliminate future threats to their civilization. Martinez had used historical examples to illustrate his point. When humans fought against dangerous enemies, they did not stop at simple military victory. They destroyed the enemy's ability to wage war, occupied their territory, and rebuilt their entire society according to human values. I asked Martinez what humans planned to do with the Vorthik Empire after they won the war. His answer still gives me nightmares. He said that humans would dismantle our military, occupy our worlds, and spend generations teaching our people how to live peacefully. Human concept of total victory was unlike anything in Vorthik military tradition. When the Empire conquered other species, they usually allowed the defeated enemies to maintain their own governments and cultures as long as they paid tribute and obeyed imperial law. But humans seemed to believe that allowing defeated enemies to maintain their military traditions was a mistake that led to future conflicts. They preferred to completely reshape conquered societies to prevent any possibility of renewed warfare. Captain Blake had confirmed this during their final conversation before reaching Vorthik space. She explained that humanity had learned from their own history that temporary victories meant nothing if the underlying causes of conflict remained unchanged. Blake told me that humans had fought the same enemies multiple times throughout their history because they had failed to address the root causes of warfare. She said that humanity would not make that mistake with the Vorthik Empire. The prisoner exchange had taken place at a neutral space station near the border between human and Vorthik territory. Zektar had expected to be debriefed by Imperial intelligence officers and then returned to active duty. Instead, he found himself reassigned to a desk job in the military planning department. Admiral Krext had survived the disaster at Luna Base 7, but his career was effectively over. He spent his remaining years in disgrace, writing reports that no one wanted to read about the tactical superiority of human forces. Most Vorthic officers refused to believe his warnings about human capabilities. The official Imperial position was that Luna Base 7 had been an anomaly, a lucky victory by primitives who had stumbled upon some advanced technology. The High Command insisted that a proper military campaign would easily crush human resistance and restore Vorthic dominance. But those of us who had actually fought against humans knew better. We tried to warn our superiors about what was coming, but our reports were dismissed as the ravings of traumatized soldiers. The Empire was determined to continue the war regardless of the consequences. Zektar had been assigned to analyze human military communications intercepted by Vorthic intelligence services. What he learned from those intercepts terrified him, more than anything he had experienced during the battle itself. The humans were not just preparing for another defensive action. They were planning a systematic campaign to destroy every Vorthic military installation in the galaxy. Operation Prometheus was designed to carry the war to our homeworlds and eliminate our ability to threaten anyone ever again. The scale of human preparations was staggering. Intelligence reports showed massive fleet movements, the construction of new weapon systems, and the mobilization of millions of human soldiers. More disturbing was evidence that other alien species were joining the human war effort. Species that had been conquered by the Vorthic Empire decades earlier were volunteering to fight alongside human forces. The humans had somehow convinced our former victims to ally with them against us. Our empire was facing a coalition of enemies instead of a single primitive world. The first human counterattacks began 6 months after Luna Base 7. They targeted remote outposts and supply lines, using the same tactical innovations that had proven so effective during the initial battle. Vorthic forces found themselves outmaneuvered and overwhelmed by enemies who seemed to know their every move. Colonel Pete Davis led the assault on Vorthic Station Omega. Using a combination of electronic warfare and psychological operations, they completely demoralized the defenders. The station surrendered without firing a shot, its crew convinced that resistance was hopeless. Major Karen Lopez commanded the operation that destroyed the Vorthic fleet base at Kepler 7. She used captured Vorthic vessels, operated by human crews, to infiltrate the base's defenses. By the time the defenders realized what was happening, Lopez had already seized control of their command center. But the most devastating blow came when Commander Jake Morrison led a raid on the Vorthic Military Academy on our capital world. He captured or killed most of our senior military instructors and destroyed decades of strategic planning documents. Morrison had broadcast a message to the entire Vorthic Empire after the raid, speaking in perfect Vorthic and addressing the population directly. He explained that humanity had no quarrel with ordinary Vorthic citizens, only with the military leaders who had chosen to wage aggressive war. Morrison offered individual Vorthic soldiers the opportunity to surrender and be treated with honor. He promised that humans would rebuild our society as a peaceful member of the galactic community. But he also warned that continued resistance would result in the complete destruction of our civilization. The message had caused panic throughout the Empire. Millions of Vorthic civilians demanded that their government negotiate for peace before human forces reached the core worlds. But the High Command remained convinced that they could still achieve military victory. 3 cycles have passed since Luna Base 7, and the war continues to go badly for our forces. Human fleets have captured or destroyed over half of our military installations. Dozens of worlds have surrendered rather than face assault by human forces. Zektar stood up and walked to his window one last time. Outside, he could see the lights of Vorthic's Central Command, where military leaders still planned operations against an enemy they did not understand. I have been ordered to delete this recording and report for duty with the Home Defense Fleet tomorrow. The High Command believes that defending our capital world will somehow restore Vorthic military prestige and convince humans to negotiate from a position of weakness. But Sektar knew better. He had seen what humans were capable of when they were truly determined to win. The home defense fleet would be destroyed, just like every other Vorthic force that had faced human tactical superiority. I am sending copies of this recording to neutral worlds throughout the galaxy. Other species need to understand what they will face if they choose to make humanity their enemy.